Good morning. I loved what Brian said about the window of time that we have to drive transformation based on this incredibly innovative technology. How many people in this room would self-identify as a technologist? Show of hands. Okay. How many would identify as a strategist or business architect? Okay, that's interestingly, I think that's exactly where we're headed, is having that mix and combination of people together to really drive forward what Brian and Rob, to an extent, we're talking about around the business model change that's necessary. I think that we're in an incredible moment in time where the nature of what a digital business means and the notion of a winning digital business is about to fundamentally change. Right? So the winning digital business in the current period and the prior period has been, how do I gather as much data as I can from wherever I can get it? How can I monitor a network? How can I gather, whether firsthand, secondhand, tertiary, gather this data, apply machine learning algorithms and insights to be able to customize and hyper-personalize services to deliver to end consumers at scale. Right? That was really, in my mind, the theme of the prior period. And of course, that has led to whatever you want to call it, Techlash. Actually, we've just launched our Tech Vision product, report this past week. We think it's more about Tech Clash, right? We've now reached a point with social, regulatory, legal frustrations around that model of individual, monolithic, data gathering, hyper-personalized experiences and services. And really, the next period, the winning digital business in the next period is going to be defined by who can create the most trusting relationships between them and their customers or them and their partners, and what better technology to enable that than what we're all working on. The whole notion of shared ledger, the whole notion of being able to have that auditability, transparency, control, the whole fundamental principles of self-managed identity, all of these things, I think, couldn't have emerged at a better time. Certainly the causal nature of how it's emerged against this backdrop of GDPR, California privacy, our frustration with data hack, data theft, data breach, and the emergence of these new business models, I think is incredibly exciting and the focus of how we carry forward. So I was talking with Brian around this talk and talking about what comes next. And as Brian referenced, right, we're doing a tremendous amount of work. Our particular focus has been to prioritize our efforts around financial services infrastructure, digital identity, and supply chain. I'm incredibly proud of as a recovering capital markets expert, I'm incredibly proud of the Red String video and our focus around social impact, humanitarian impact, applications of this technology. And when I think about those three domains of digital identity, of financial infrastructure, and supply chain, really we're at the stage now where we have incredible foundational capabilities. And we've got the beginnings of those first use cases with small communities coming together, groups of 3, 4, 6, 8. If you take a Ristream Collaborative, 44 organizations. We're at that first wave of use case implementation, and really the challenge is, how do we actually carry forward to scale implementations? I get asked all the time by analysts and reporters around kind of where are we in terms of production stats around blockchain implementations, and I'm always careful about how I answer it. Just the broad competitive dynamic of numbers. Really, I think as a community, our ability to talk about where we're having an entire ecosystem move together, the percentage, the footprint of an entire ecosystem redesigning its end-to-end flow is really the valuable, measurable progress point. And we're starting to now see that. So in terms of how this plays out and what comes next, let's take them one by one. So digital identity. There are teams in here, and we've talked, we either talk regularly or caught up over the last night at the diversity dinner and some a little bit today. Phenomenal efforts around digital identity happening around the world. Brian referenced Kiva's work, the Canadian teams here. We've got different implementations underway, and our commitment to Hyperledger and Indy and Indy giving way to Aries over time, that whole construct, really the way this plays out is islands of implementation that provide end users with an incredibly useful digital identity construct that can go from one context to the next. And we build off of these different islands of implementation, and this all works if we're all using the same open source underlying code base, and it then interoperates, and we're building out these islands of implementation. Each island has to have the value of in and of itself to do it, or the commitment of those doing it to invest for that future wider landscape. But that's how it's playing out. So just as a theme for the coming days, for those of us that are working on those different islands of implementation, I think the dialogue that we can have around how to extend those and start to partner together is incredibly important. In financial services infrastructure, Rob talked about all the great work that DTCC is doing, driving, from their position within from the U.S. Market in particular. On a global basis, I think we've now also foundationally tripped over into the period where the whole notion of tokenization of value, central bank digital currency, that as a foundational building block to unlock many of the use cases to be able to directly exchange a digital asset and digital value with that certainty of its central bank backing, incredibly transformative. And so with the announcement, obviously Libra last June, China's announcement over the summer, we just announced with Sweden's Riksbank in the fall their beginnings of their efforts. The central bank community, definitionally, has to be conservative and focused and quiet. We've now seen that put on a whole new level of intensity. And as a building block for the strategists and the technical architects in the room, bringing together that core capability is just going to accelerate through the remainder of the year. We have a team here. I would love to talk with anyone about that over the next couple of days. Very excited as well around our digital dollar project, where we're bringing together a group to focus on that in the US context and how that will play out for the dollar. On supply chain, the thing that is most exciting to me, all of the circular supply chain initiatives are incredibly valuable to really address the core gap that we've had, which is we've never been able to get the money that comes out of the end of a supply chain back to the people at the beginning to actually influence the behaviors at the beginning of the supply chain. To be able to directly link end consumers with those original producers, have a payment rail, have that digital identity construct to have the certainty and the transparency to understand those behaviors at the beginning. Sorry, that clock's not moving. I'm going to lose track of time. For those in the back. Is incredibly exciting, incredibly worthwhile, and just the beginning. The fundamental notion that at the end of the day, whether you're talking about order to cash, procure to pay, trade finance, supply chain, logistics, ensuring those goods that are moving, all of those different domains are about the same single transaction. That we over time have just had this orthodoxy that we need to think about as separate processes, and the ability to bring these, through this technology to bring those communities together is going to be massively impactful, and we're talking about trillions of dollars of value. All of that is incredibly tough and requires the strategist architects and the technologists to be closely partnered, that deep industry expertise as to how to apply this technology, and in balance, the technologist's ability to understand the context within which they're innovating, and that exchange is just fundamentally critical. We're focused on building up that team and partnering with those that share that same mentality and capability and bridging all of those gaps. To that end, part of, I think, what has emerged is some inadequacy of our language. We actually, I'm in the midst, I may get in trouble. I'm looking for my marketing lead. Yeah, there she is. We're in the midst of rebranding. We think actually in our dialogue with our clients that are up the learning curve is vastly more important to talk about the combination of architectural patterns that can be applied in this space and not get hung up in specific language. Thank you. It's not the sexiest of terms, but we are starting to talk about multi-party systems. That when you think about the constructs of distributed ledger, of confidential compute, secure enclaves, federated learning, distributed data patterns broadly, the valuable thing is to take all of these dimensions of configurable assets. Do I really have 15 minutes? All right. Let's see. I think I have 8. Take all of those valuable different configurable technical innovations and put them all in the context of the business transformation we're trying to drive. And so we're going to start to use that language more and more. We're going to start to move away from the blockchain term. Over time, it obviously still is important for large segments of our community, but the ability to make, to recognize the variety of architectural patterns that can be productively applied is critically important. So we can debate this over coffee and drinks as to what a better term might be, but I think that's part of what happens next is that integration of multiple different architectural patterns, and in particular a big focus around another Linux project that has kicked up around confidential compute consortium. That whole notion of extending the privacy and confidential compute, combining it with shared ledger, combining that with self-managed identity, et cetera. It's those combinations that are going to be incredibly impactful. So in terms of the conference, we've got a big team here. Our focus, of course, is we're not a product company, we're a services company. So we want to talk to everybody. Our whole point is to bring together these collective communities to see what we can to drive and transform. And just as Brian said, I think that statement around create more value than you capture, I think is spot on and part of our ethos. So excited, we've got a session on Thursday in work that we've done in partnership with the World Economic Forum around the value cases for blockchain-based transformation. Excited to see anyone who wants to join for that, to really explore all of this only works in our minds best if you start with the what value you're trying to create, and then that leading into, based on those requirements, what architectural patterns will satisfy and deliver on that value. That'll be the focus of that session. Rob and I are actually going to do a session in a couple of hours on how do you govern these ecosystems. Rob and I are going to do that session. As Brian referenced, the critically important nature of what's the term he used? Minimally viable centralization or decentralization. I think is spot on, and being able to think through how do you then govern these blockchain-based ecosystems is work that we've partnered with the DTCC on and put out a paper with. Excited to talk about everyone and get their input about that. It should be a phenomenal conference. We are, as Rob said, I think there's 17 of us from the board that are here. We're excited to interact and talk on multiple dimensions, and reach out. Looking forward to it, and welcome to the day. I'm going to stop there.